All right, it's the start of a new week here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Welcome to Monday. Welcome to the Morning Pitt. You know, it's the best way to start your day. You get your morning shower, you get your morning shave, and you get your morning Pitt. Talking about everything going on in the world of Pitt sports as we head into April, our first Morning Pitt of the month of April, and we certainly have a lot to talk about today and this week and all through the offseason. I keep going back and forth, sort of debating with myself, you know, if we should take a break on the Morning Pitt through some of these off-season months. Maybe when we get into July or something like that, or even May, we might find ourselves stretching for some topics, and maybe that'll still end up being the case. But Pitt keeps giving us things to talk about. Like last week, you know, you end up with, you know, we're kind of recapping spring camp. We're talking about this, we're talking about that. And then, you know, you end up with a bunch of commitments and recruiting news to discuss. So we have lots of topics to get to there, and it just sort of keeps rolling. So as long as Pitt keeps providing us with things to talk about, we will keep doing these Morning Pitt videos. Of course, you want to make sure you don't miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You subscribe to the YouTube channel. The subscribe button's right down there. Click that thing. And then if you want to make sure that you can get notified every time we release new video content here, you can turn on your notifications. You know, we put out some videos over the weekend, video of Pitt's offensive line working out in spring camp. We've got videos of the quarterbacks throwing today, some deep passes, so you can look forward to that later today. If you want to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on the notifications. You'll get an alert sent to your phone so you know what's up at all times. And of course, you'll also get a notification when we go live, because we have our live show every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you do that. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on those notifications. And while you're here, click the like button as well. We would appreciate that. Give a little thumbs up to the video. That always is nice to have. So as we head into a new week, I was thinking about it yesterday, you know, Saturday and Sunday. Just thinking about, yeah, what's sort of going on? What's my overall vibe about, you know, Pitt right now? And some of this stuff is a little bit we touched on last week, but I just can't get past the thought that the football program has a whole lot of momentum right now. I mean, just a whole lot of momentum, maybe more than we've seen in any recent offseason, even more than the year after the ACC championship game. You know, more than, I'm trying to think of any other times when they really entered an offseason with a lot of momentum. I mean, after 2017, even though they went 5-7, finished that year beating Miami with Kenny Pickett sort of making his, you know, announcing his presence to the world. And, you know, even that year, you go through that offseason. I mean, there was hype and there was momentum and there was excitement about Pickett and excitement about the way they finished the season with that win, but it wasn't the momentum that they have right now. It's really remarkable. And I was trying to think of how to like break it down to sort of quantify and qualify, but to quantify the momentum they have right now. And it sort of occurred to me that when you look at offseason momentum, I think particularly around this time of year, March, April, heading into May, there's sort of three main categories that are really going to stand as kind of a barometer of the momentum your program has and what direction it's heading in. Not necessarily the direction it's actually heading in, but what direction it appears to be heading. I mean, it's perception, hype, you know what I mean? These kinds of things, momentum, all these things we talk about on the outside, and it is perception. And I think we know that perception is valuable in college sports. It helps with recruiting. It, you know, helps with rankings and polls, and, you know, and if it's based in something tangible, it helps, you know, it leads to success on the field. And so I was trying to think about, I thought of these sort of three categories that you can look at a program and sort of evaluate them in March and April and say, all right, where do you stand? You know what I mean? How do you stand right now in these three categories? Because if you're doing well in these three categories, then you would say your program's got some significant off-season momentum. And the three categories that I came up with are recruiting, NFL draft buzz, and then sort of the team, which is how they finished the previous season, what they're bringing back, and sort of reports out of spring camp. Now, obviously, we get into some nebulous territory there, some hearsay, because everybody's a champion in spring ball. But I think there are the things that the coaches and players say on the record, and then there are things that sort of you pick up off the record that probably has a little bit more substance or basis in truth. And you kind of judge based on some of that as well. And so those three categories. Where does Pitt stand in those three categories? And like I said, we touched on some of this at different points last week, but I thought it'd be a good thing to sort of start this week talking about on a Monday. And when you start with recruiting, I mean, you know where that stands, I think. If you followed along last week, because we talked about it several times. I wrote about it in the 321 column last Friday on Panther-Lair.com. I mean, the momentum is at an all-time high for this time of year. 6 commitments in the month of March, 10 commitments, so far in the class of 2024. One of just a handful of programs across the country with double-digit commitments in the class at this point. And they're getting a bunch of commitments, and they're also drawing guys to campus. You look at this past weekend, from Friday and Saturday alone. I mean, they had 3 4-star kids that I just sort of jotted down real quick. The 4-star prospects who came to campus, and they're not local. This isn't just a guy who went to Central Catholic or something. Colton Heinrich was a tight end, a 4-star tight end from Florida who came in on Friday. On Saturday, they had Gabriel Williams, a linebacker from Maryland who visited. And they also had Jalen Todd, a defensive back from Michigan who visited. And these are 4-star prospects who came in and, by all accounts, had great visits. Our guy Jim Hammett talked to Colton Heinrich, the 4-star tight end. And he gave rave reviews to the visit. I talked to Gabriel Williams, a 4-star linebacker. That article is going to be on Panther-Lair.com today. And, I mean, he said things like, let me bring up his quote here because it was such a good quote. There was a great, where did I put it? You don't know what to expect, but then you get there and it beats your expectations. It was definitely like that at Pitt. I see what people see in Pitt to have them high on the list. So, this is a guy who's obviously been talking to other recruits. He knows they've got a bunch of commitments. This is Gabriel Williams, 4-star linebacker from Maryland. He knows that they're getting a lot of commitments. They've got a lot of guys that are really interested in them. He's probably talked to other recruits who've spoken highly of Pitt. He goes to see it for himself for the first time and says, oh, I get it. I understand now. I see why guys are so high on Pitt right now. And it's the facilities, and it's the team, and it's the coaching staff, and it's all those things. But he comes on campus, and he says, oh, I get it. And now Pitt's one of his top schools, and he's got a good offer sheet. This, like I say, it's a 4-star linebacker prospect. He's got really good schools after him, and Pitt's I don't want to say they're number one, but they're pretty high on his list in the aftermath of the visit because they've got that kind of momentum right now. Jalen Todd, defensive back from Michigan, again, another guy who had a great visit on Saturday. And this is what they're doing. They're sort of stacking it. Before that, Coy Beasley, a defensive back from Ohio, came in on Thursday, had a really good visit. He's not a 4-star. He's like the highest possible 3-star, but he's got offers from all over the country. SEC offers and whatnot, and he's got Pitt high on his list. Pitt's one of his top schools now after visiting because they've got that kind of momentum and it keeps building. Now they're selling a good product. I think that's part of it. When you have momentum in recruiting, some of it does kind of drive itself. But some of it is, one kid commits and another kid sees it and maybe he decides to commit and they all start, it starts kind of building momentum that way. But when you've got a good product to sell, when you've got team success and facilities and coaching stability and, a good team and all that, it's sort of that builds the momentum because you keep getting positive reviews and rave reviews and ultimately commitments. Now, these guys we're talking about, Heinrich and Williams and Todd and Beasley, they didn't commit. But almost all of them are going to come back for official visits in June. You know what can happen then. So you're seeing that momentum both in the commitments that they got and then also the impressions they're making on some of these guys who are coming in just to visit. It's impressive to see. I mean, they are really doing a bang-up job. And that's credit to obviously the coaching staff, but it's credit to the recruiting department too. Those guys, Graham Wilbert and Carlos Zofko and those Adam Calturi and the whole group they have there. They're doing really, really well with these recruits, and it's just building that momentum and that perception of momentum. The other area, like I mentioned, is the NFL draft. And we talked about this last week. We talked about the impact that it can have, and we talked about how big it is for Pitt to be, on the verge of having first-round draft picks in back-to-back NFL drafts, which for some programs that happens on the reg. You know what I mean? Georgia's going to do that. Ohio State will do that. Clemson will do that. I mean, some of these schools pump out first-round draft picks pretty frequently. For a school like Pitt, who's in, maybe that middle tier, near the upper part of the middle tier, but still part of that middle tier of college football, getting first-round draft picks in back-to-back years is huge because it helps with the brand recognition. When they're watching the NFL draft, when they're watching that first round, and they're watching the draft preview shows, and they're reading this or seeing that, seeing the mock drafts, and a guy from Pitt keeps showing up, it creates some prominence, some brand prominence for the name of the university. And I think that is a real thing. A long time ago, I've said this. I've told this many times, but a long time ago, I remember talking to a recruiter at Pitt, and we were talking about, and this was a guy who was a very good recruiter, and I asked him, like, well, what is it? What do you do? Like, what makes, what do you think is the secret, of being a good recruiter? And he was like, look, I just have to make sure they are constantly talking about Pitt. I might have even been having a conversation with them about negative recruiting. And he said, I'm not going to negative recruit other schools because I don't want the kid thinking about those other schools at all. I'm not going to bring up, enter whatever school you want to talk about, Penn State, West Virginia, Ohio State, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to bring those schools up because I don't want them thinking about those schools. I want them thinking about Pitt. I want every day they think about Pitt. I want Pitt to be a school that is always in the forefront of their brain, and it's my job to do that by staying in constant communication and contact with them. I think people make jokes about Tim Salem or question his recruiting. I think he's low-key one of the best recruiters on the staff because he's constantly in touch with guys. Constantly. When you talk to recruits, when you interview recruits who are being recruited by Tim Salem, they talk about, oh yeah, Coach Salem, he's always sending me graphics. He's always sending me images. And you might see some of those on Twitter or whatever, and you might think that's kind of goofy. But it resonates with the recruits, not just because they say, oh, that's a great graphic, I might want to go to Pitt, but because it's constantly reminding them that Pitt exists, that Pitt is a place that's out there, that Pitt is an option, that Pitt is a place they want to consider. You have to keep them, you have to make Pitt as prominent as possible. So that when these kids think about colleges, Pitt is one that they think of quickly. Right off the top of their head, it's one of the first schools that comes to mind because they're thinking about it all the time because the coaches are emphasizing that. And then when you have draft success, when you have, team success, obviously, you are going to help establish that. You know what I mean? You're going to help establish that prominence, that brand recognition. I hate saying brand so many times. I feel like we're done talking about brands, but there is something to be said for being prominent in the mind of a recruit. To being a school they think of off the top of their head all the time. And getting mentioned in the draft, having Kenny Pickett be successful, getting Kalijah Kancey to be drafted again. If they have any of their, next year's rookies start having success, whatever it is, it all helps further establish, create a place for Pitt in these recruits' minds, which is ultimately what you're trying to do. And so I think when you have NFL draft success, and you have guys who are being talked about prominently in the process and guys who get drafted, where it helps, not just, the idea, oh, that coaching staff can help get me to the NFL. It just helps hammer Pitt into the recruits' minds. And it further builds that momentum. So when you're having success in the draft, it's another big part of the momentum because it speaks to the program you're building, and obviously it helps you in recruiting as well. And then that third part is the team. When we talk about the kind of momentum you can build in the offseason, you can build momentum through recruiting, you can build momentum through the NFL draft, and then there's just basic momentum around your team, around the team that you have and the success that you expect to enjoy in the coming season. And when it comes to Pitt football, 2023 offseason, I think what I'm finding more and more, and actually this is always the case. All right, the way avid, ardent Pitt fan who follows and hangs on every snap, lives and dies with every play and every drive, the way that you or me, guy who writes about Pitt all day, every day, thinks about Pitt all the time, The way we view a season is often very different from the way the general population views the season. That's college football fans, and that's recruits. That's anybody who's not as following it as closely as you and I are, because you and I follow it very close enough that we can say 9-4. It's pretty good. Pretty disappointing to lose to Georgia Tech and Louisville. Could have won the Coastal. Could have gone back to Charlotte. They really blew those opportunities there. We can sit and talk about, boy, if Panthers had just taken a knee at the end of the first half in the Tennessee game, who knows what way the rest of the season goes. We can talk about, boy, if you don't throw a couple interceptions in the end zone at Louisville and all this different stuff, right? We can get into the nitty-gritty, dirty details of the whole thing. But for recruits, for people, a little bit further removed from the program who aren't following it just as closely, you've got a team that won 9 games, finished the season ranked, and beat UCLA in the Sun Bowl. Won a bowl game against a prominent Power 5 opponent, and won 5 games in a row to finish the season. That's that I think is how people further away from the program will see it. And when you put it just in those sort of general terms, it was an unmitigated success. People outside the program or people further away from the program aren't going to dwell nearly as much on missed opportunities as you and I might, or maybe even people at Pitt might. They're just going to look at overall and say, hey, you guys won the ACC 2 years ago and won 11 games. This year you won 9 games and beat UCLA in the Sun Bowl. You won 20 games over the last 2 years. You've been ranked a bunch. You've had Heisman Trophy finalists, a Biletnikoff Award winner. You've got a unanimous All-American, going to be a first-round draft pick 2 years in a row. Like, boy, you brought in a guy who's had some success at quarterback. You got this player back and that player back. You've got stars emerging during spring camp, certainly on the defensive side, guys like Bengali Kamara and this young defensive line and some of the safeties. Boy, certainly seems like you've got a very good team coming off a couple of years of success, heading into potentially a third year of strong success, 9, 10, 11 wins again. That's how it looks, and I'm guilty of it as much as you probably are. I spend way too much time thinking about that Georgia Tech game and the Louisville game and the opportunities that were missed by blowing those games and why they blew those games and how they can avoid blowing those games. And some of that is relevant. Some of that is important when you're trying to look ahead to this season and say, what do they need to do to make sure they don't screw up like they screwed up those games? But outside of us, I think we're in the minority that think of it like that and look at it that closely. I think for the vast majority of people who take a look at Pitt, they're going to say, this program seems to be headed pretty strong direction. They've got a coach who's been around for 8 years, heading into number 9. Again, won 20 games over the last 2 years, won an ACC championship, one of the only non-Clemson teams to win an ACC championship in the last decade, and got a good bowl win to finish it off. Now they're heading into spring. They've got, this guy back and that guy back. They've got pretty good players, see what they can do at quarterback. And, for those of us who were watching it a lot, much more closely, we can say, well, the quarterback actually has been getting rave reviews. Phil Dracovic apparently is having a very good spring, or as of the last scrimmage 2 weeks ago, he had a really, really good scrimmage. We'll see what we can find out about this past weekend's scrimmage. But by all indications, he's having a really good spring and throwing as well as he has since that first year at Boston College with Frank Cignetti. So I think in terms of the team itself, with the way they finished last year and kind of everything coming out of spring this year, it all seems to be heading in a positive direction. So you've got recruiting success. You've got strong NFL draft profiles, drawing a lot of attention, getting a lot of talk. And then you've got a team that, is coming into the offseason on a 5-game winning streak and seems to be only getting better through the spring. Pretty much checking every box here for all the kinds of offseason momentum you can have. It seems like they've got it. Now, once you get into the summer, you start getting into preseason rankings and preseason watch lists and preseason, all those kinds of things. Then we'll see what kind of recognition they're getting. But for right now, Pitt's got as much momentum as I've seen at this time of year in a long time. I can't remember the last time they had this much momentum. It was probably after like 2009 or so, maybe after 2007, something like that, where they were really riding a wave like they seem to be riding right now. So it's a pretty good spot for Pitt. It seems like a pretty good place for Pitt to be in as they head here toward the final 2 weeks of spring camp. Of course, they'll have 2 practices this week and then 3 next week. They have 2 practices in the South Side next week and then the spring game after that. So just practicing Tuesday and Thursday this week. No practice on the weekend due to the Easter holiday. Then next week they'll have Tuesday, Thursday, and the spring game on Saturday. Guessing they'll draft teams for the spring game on Wednesday. We'll have coverage of that, of course, on Panther-Lair.com. Make sure you tune into the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. I just said it. Got distracted by the dog walking over there. It's the most comprehensive source, Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. Find it all at Panther-Lair.com, and of course, message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. All day, every day, there's conversations going on. Panther-Lair.com. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video, click subscribe, do those things to help us out. We appreciate it. And I think that's about it. I hope you had a great weekend. Hope today is a great start to the week for you. And we will be back tomorrow morning with all kinds of Pitt conversation right here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.